The air was still, too still. A hawk circled overhead, its cry echoing through the rocky hills of northern Arizona. Beneath it, nestled at the end of a winding gravel trail, stood a weathered cabin, sturdy, unbothered, and fiercely alone. It belonged to Mason Carter, a man who had carved peace for himself the way a miner chisels into bedrock, deliberately, patiently, and with absolute resolve. Mason didn't choose this land on a whim. It wasn't inherited, granted, or stumbled upon. He bought it with every penny saved from a decade spent working as a GIS analyst for the state's Department of Land Planning, long before burnout pushed him out and into solitude. This place, 22 acres of unforgiving terrain, no utilities, no neighbors, no noise, wasn't about escape. It was reclamation. He didn't owe anyone an explanation, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was trespassing on his own life. Until the trucks came. It began at dawn on a Thursday, one of those quiet mornings where the only sound was the distant rush of wind through mesquite and the occasional chirp of a mourning dove. Mason was still in his flannel pajama pants and boots, sipping black coffee on his porch, when he noticed the dust cloud rising in the distance. His gut twisted before his brain caught up. 6 cement trucks, one by one, lumbered around the final bend of his private road like mechanical elephants in a procession. Behind them, 2 landscaping trailers bounced wildly over the gravel, followed by a battered porta-potty unit strapped to a flatbed like some ridiculous parade float. Mason blinked. He hadn't hallucinated since college, but this felt like one of those moments. Leading the convoy was a cherry-red crossover SUV, spotless, humming smoothly as it rolled to a stop just feet from his porch. The door popped open, and out stepped Karen Whitmore. Clipboard in hand, sunglasses perched in her blonde bob, khaki capris sharp-creased, as if ironed by angels. She smiled like a politician who'd just found out you didn't vote, and she walked with the misplaced authority of someone who had never been told no and meant it. "Good morning," she called cheerfully, raising her voice over the sound of diesel engines idling. Mason didn't reply, not out of rudeness, but because he knew a performance when he saw one. Karen gestured broadly to the trucks behind her. "Just a quick pour this morning. Shouldn't take more than an hour or two." He took a sip of coffee. "On whose land?" She blinked. "Well, yours technically, but we have verbal authorization. You know, for community development. The Whispering Pines Extension Project? I sent you an email." Mason held up a notarized letter in response. Neatly typed, legally airtight, and dated 2 weeks ago, explicitly denying any HOA access to his private road. He didn't wave it. He didn't yell. He just stood there, the Arizona sun creeping up behind him, casting long shadows and longer implications. Behind them, the construction crew began to shift uneasily. One of the drivers rolled down his window and muttered to his colleague, "You sure she said this was okay?" Then came the whirring sound. A mechanical thunk echoed across the gravel as the solar-powered gate, installed just a week prior and painted to match the rocky earth, descended into place. The blinking red light above it began to pulse. Access revoked. The trucks were in. The only way out sealed. Karen turned, saw the gate, and froze like a coyote in headlights. Her face twitched. The clipboard slipped half an inch in her hand, and for a moment, she looked human. Vulnerable. Defeated. Mason wasn't angry. Not anymore. Now he was curious. Genuinely curious. How did she think this was going to go? 2 weeks earlier, the flags had appeared. Bright pink survey markers stabbed into the soil like insults. Mason noticed them during his morning walk down the winding stretch of gravel that connected his land to the nearest county road. At first, he assumed it was a mistake. Perhaps a utility company had gone off course, or some overeager intern had dropped the wrong map overlay into the GIS system. But when he followed the trail of flags to the roadside, he found her. Karen. She was standing beside a white SUV, hazard lights blinking, talking to a man in a reflective vest. Her hand gestures were wide, theatrical, pointing toward Mason's land like she was describing the site of a new shopping mall. He approached calmly. "Can I help you?" She turned with that same tight-lipped smile. "Oh, hello. Karen Whitmore, HOA president of Whispering Pines Estates. You must be the Carter fellow." He raised an eyebrow. "President of a 6-month-old development with 33 unfinished lots." She didn't flinch. "We're behind schedule. We've filed for emergency access." Your road is the most efficient route for cement delivery. The easement overlays grant us temporary. No, Mason said. I spoke with the county, she insisted. He nodded. And they'll confirm it's private. This road is mine. Bought, maintained, and surveyed twice. Karen's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before she tucked it back in place. Well, we'll see what we can work out, she said. He thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. The next day, the porta potty arrived. They unloaded it across from his mailbox. No warning. No apology. The backhoe came next, chewing up his carefully laid gravel like it was a public highway. The following day, a laminated sign appeared on a metal stake. Future Whispering Pines Access Point. Thank you for your cooperation. Mason didn't scream. He didn't rant. He took pictures. He opened a binder. He made calls. Then he installed the gate. And now, here they were, trapped, stunned, and on camera. As Karen frantically dialed her phone, muttering about miscommunication and eminent domain, Mason sipped his coffee and looked up at the fence post-mounted trail cam blinking silently above her shoulder. Smile, he said softly, more to himself than to her. Because this wasn't just trespassing anymore. It was fraud, and Karen had just cemented her place at the center of it. The wind cut sharp across the ridge that night. Mason stood alone in his living room, laptop open, eyes locked on a glowing screen filled with county permit records. The fire in the wood stove behind him crackled faintly, but the warmth didn't reach him. Not now. Not with what he had just uncovered. It was all there. Buried deep in the zoning applications for Whispering Pines Estates was a permit, filed under Karen Whitmore's name, that included a hand-drawn access overlay using his parcel number. Not just mentioned. Labeled. As if his land was already part of their HOA. The audacity of it burned hotter than the flames behind him. This wasn't just a miscommunication. It was theft. A paper-based annexation of private property done with the hope, or the arrogance, that Mason wouldn't notice. That he wouldn't fight. That he'd be like every other landowner, too busy, too tired, or too intimidated to push back. But Mason Carter wasn't just a landowner. He was a man who'd spent 10 years verifying parcel data for a living. He trained county employees how to cross-reference topographic overlays and digital tax lots. This wasn't a puzzle for him. It was muscle memory. And now, the war Karen started with a backhoe and a clipboard was about to shift onto a battlefield she never expected. The next morning, he was on the phone with the zoning division of Coconino County by 8 a.m. sharp. It took 3 transfers, 1 accidental hang-up, and a brief hold loop playing country music, but eventually, a tired-sounding employee named Glenn answered. Mason laid it out simply. His private parcel number had been used in a development filing, without permission. There was a long pause. Then a sigh. Yeah, Glenn said. You're not the first. That development's been creative with their paperwork. I'll elevate this to the board. Mason filed a formal complaint that afternoon. He attached every document, his deed, the county-verified parcel map, the notarized letter denying access, the surveillance photo of Karen and the cement trucks, even a high-resolution screenshot of the zoning PDF showing the fraudulent overlay. He printed a hard copy and drove it into town himself. One went to the zoning board. One went into a fireproof lockbox back at his cabin. And one, metaphorically, was aimed right between the eyes of Karen Whitmore's ambitions. He should have expected her retaliation. It arrived 3 days later in the form of a manila envelope hand-delivered by a process server who looked like he'd rather be getting a root canal. Karen had filed for a temporary injunction to force construction access through Mason's Road. The language was laced with dramatic flair, emergency disruption, essential infrastructure, community vision under siege. It read like a war poem written by someone who thought cement trucks were sacred. But the real punchline? She'd attached an email from the county zoning office, the very office now investigating her, unknowingly including a damning line. Pending investigation into potential parcel misuse. Mason laughed. Not loudly. Just that dry, tired chuckle of a man who'd read enough court filings to recognize when his opponent had handed him the sword she was about to fall on. Still, he wasn't taking chances. He called Sam Harlan, a zoning attorney he'd worked with years ago during a boundary dispute near Flagstaff. Sam owed him a favor, and Mason was ready to collect. Sam read the injunction, snorted once, and said, "This is a toddler's tantrum in legalese. Let's bury it." They drafted a crisp rebuttal, 3 pages, 6 exhibits, and 1 particularly sharp paragraph accusing the HOA of abuse of legal process. Mason didn't care about the drama. He wanted a paper trail so long that Karen couldn't escape it with 10 lawyers and a prayer. While the court date loomed, Mason made a quiet move. He bought land. Specifically, a small tax lien parcel just 60 feet long that sat directly where the gravel road met the county highway, a sliver of undeveloped scrub brush no one had cared about. Until now. Mason paid $3,800 online and filed the paperwork within hours. It was officially his. Now, even if Karen won in court, and she wouldn't, she'd still be locked out at the gate. Because the gate now stood on Mason's second parcel. The checkmate wasn't even subtle. It was elegant. The hearing came faster than expected. Mason showed up in clean jeans, a button-down shirt, and the quiet confidence of a man who had already won. Karen arrived in suburban battlefield attire, pastel blouse, pearls, and a binder bursting with papers she clearly didn't understand. The judge was a man who looked like he'd handled 3 dog-barking disputes and a divorce mediation before lunch. He flipped through her filing, then Mason's. "This is a private property matter," the judge said flatly. "The plaintiff has no legal standing to request access." Injunction denied. Karen tried to object. The judge raised a hand. "Ma'am, you cannot submit someone else's land as part of your permit and expect them not to notice." And just like that, it was over. Or so Mason thought. 3 days later, a new letter arrived. This one wasn't legal, it was friendly. Sort of. A different law firm now represented the HOA. They were hoping for mediation, offering to repair any incidental damage, and explore a temporary supervised access agreement. Mason didn't respond. Instead, he framed it, not as a trophy, but as a warning. They were losing. And the losing had just begun. What Karen didn't know was that while she was drafting polite letters and desperate offers, the county zoning board had moved fast. Mason's complaint wasn't the first, as it turned out. A second landowner near the South Ridge had also filed. Now, the board had opened a full investigation into Whispering Pines development practices, road access, lot dimensions, environmental impact reports, and, most damning of all, use of private parcels and public filings. The county assessor even called Mason, asking if the new gate at his parcel was permanent, and whether there were any future commercial plans. He told them no. It was just for privacy. The assessor chuckled. "Just making sure. There may be further implications." Mason hung up, poured himself a drink, and sat beneath the trail cam, watching the sun dip behind the ridge. The trucks hadn't returned. The road was quiet again. But the real storm was just beginning, and Mason Carter was ready for it. The Arizona sky stretched wide and empty above Mason's cabin, but he knew better than to trust that kind of quiet. Out here, silence wasn't peace, it was strategy. Especially when your enemy thought in terms of easements and community vision statements. Karen Whitmore had gone quiet. Too quiet. The court ruling should have been the end. Injunction denied. Claims rejected. Access revoked. But Mason had learned that people like Karen didn't just walk away, they waited. And when they came back, it wasn't with apology. It was with escalation. That escalation came in the form of a low mechanical hum. It started subtly, barely a whisper above the breeze. A whirring sound that could have passed for an oversized bee, maybe a distant lawnmower. But it wasn't. It was a drone, not a toy, not some hobbyist weekend project. This one flew steady, smooth, hovered like it had instructions. It circled the gate entrance twice, then passed over the brushland to the east. Too low for a survey. Too high to be accidental. Mason stood on his porch, watching it disappear behind the tree line, the gears already turning in his mind. The drone came back 2 days later. Then again, always at dawn or dusk. Always above the stretch of land Karen had once tried to pave over with cement trucks and bravado. There was no mistaking the pattern. Someone was watching. Mason didn't rush to react. That wasn't his way. Instead, he called an old contact at the FAA, he still had a few names from his state GIS days, and asked casually if there were any registered drone flight plans in the region. The answer was predictable. Nope. Nothing filed in that airspace, the rep said. You want to submit an unauthorized surveillance report? Mason paused. Not yet. He hung up and went to work, not with threats, but with petty, surgical precision. The next morning, he walked to the end of his driveway, nailed a cardboard sign to his fence, and wrote in bold black marker. Drone operator, kindly send footage to county zoning board. They're collecting all visual evidence of HOA misuse. The drone never came back, but Karen did. It happened 3 days later. Mason was trimming brush near the east fence when he heard tires on gravel. He turned, heart already bracing. Sure enough, a dusty silver sedan pulled up just short of the gate. Karen emerged, arms crossed, sunglasses perched on her head like a crown of delusion. A man in business casual slouched in the driver's seat behind her, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Mr. Carter," she began, without so much as a hello. Her voice had that brittle edge people use when they're pretending they're still in control. "The HOA would like to offer to purchase access rights. We're prepared to be more than fair." Mason didn't answer right away. He looked at her like a zoologist studying an invasive species. "Define fair." She named a number. A joke of an offer. He laughed, not kindly. Just a short, incredulous exhale. Karen didn't blink. "It would be easier if you agreed," she said, voice cooling. "You know, before this becomes complicated." Now he understood. This wasn't a deal. It was a threat dressed in pearls. He took a step forward, nodding toward the new chain-link fence rising behind him. Steel posts. Concrete footers. Motion-activated camera mounted 15 feet high, blinking red like an unblinking eye. "No deal. No talks. No access," Mason said. "You want a road? Build one. I'm not here to fix your bad planning." The man in the car muttered something and opened his door, clearly hoping to escape the awkwardness. Karen's eyes flared. She opened her mouth, then closed it. She left without another word. But the war wasn't over. Only shifting fronts. That week, Mason received a formal letter from the county zoning board. The contents were simple, yet devastating for Karen. Whispering Pines HOA was officially cited for unauthorized use of private parcel data, filing development plans with incorrect property boundaries, failing to disclose required communications with landowners, attempted regulatory circumvention of zoning review, potential violations of planning fraud statutes. The board was now reevaluating all permits tied to the development. Translation? Karen's concrete kingdom had just lost its foundation. But Mason wasn't celebrating. Not yet. The next few days were strange. Too many cars slowing down near his gate. Too many sideways glances in town. He noticed a few HOA residents whispering at the farmer's market, others flat out ignoring him. Then the notes started appearing. Folded slips of paper in his mailbox. No return address. One read, "We didn't know. She never told us it wasn't hers." Another, "Sorry for what she did. Please don't hate all of us." A third was simply, "You were right." Mason didn't respond. He didn't need to. They knew. Then one night, a pile of gravel was dumped across the entry to the access lot. Sloppy. Vindictive. Pointless. But Mason didn't call the sheriff. Instead, he posted grainy footage from his trail cam on the local community forum, captioned, "Someone made a mess. Hope they come clean it up." 2 days later, the gravel was gone. Mason could feel it, the shift in air and tension. Karen's authority wasn't just cracking. It was crumbling. And he wasn't lifting a finger. He didn't have to. He won the gate. Now he was winning the neighborhood. The final blow didn't come with a bang. It came with a registered letter on a Monday morning. The envelope was thick, official-looking, with the dry scent of recycled paper and desperation. Inside, Mason found a complaint filed against him in small claims court, the last arena where Karen Whitmore still believed she could win. The accusation? Obstruction of community infrastructure and landscaping to interfere with public access. He almost laughed. Not out of confidence, out of sheer fatigue. It was like watching a house of cards collapse and still seeing someone inside trying to sweep the floor. Mason didn't panic. He brewed coffee, pulled out his binder of documents, now so thick it required its own shelf, and began assembling his final reply. Not just with facts, but with intent. Because this wasn't just a legal defense anymore. It was a warning to every clipboard tyrant who believed they could rewrite someone else's boundaries and call it progress. The courtroom was small, functional. No jury box. Just worn-out benches, pale wood paneling, and the tired sigh of the air conditioner humming in the background. Mason arrived early, binder tucked under one arm like a blueprint for Judgment Day. He took a seat in the back row, not to hide, but to watch. Karen sat at the plaintiff's table, her hair pinned perfectly, lips tight, a thick manila folder in front of her bursting with chaotic printouts and post-it notes. She looked like she had spent the whole weekend playing attorney with a highlighter and no clue. Her new lawyer, young, anxious, and clearly regretting this assignment, fidgeted as the judge entered. When the case was called, Karen's attorney began his speech. He spoke of community good, infrastructure development, and Mason's intentional disruption. He used phrases like malicious obstruction and prejudicial landscaping, as if building a birdhouse in your own yard was now an act of war. Mason waited. Then he stood, walked to the defense table, opened his binder, and calmly asked to submit Exhibit A. Inside were the original parcel deed, county-certified zoning maps, the notarized denial letter, trail cam photos of unauthorized construction, and the piece de resistance, a signed letter from the zoning board, dated 1 week prior. Whispering Pines HOA has been cited for misrepresentation of property lines, improper permit applications, and unauthorized use of private land in official filings. Mason read the sentence aloud. Karen's lawyer blinked, once, twice, like he'd swallowed a thumbtack. Karen herself turned pale. The judge didn't ask for more. He looked at the plaintiff, sighed deeply, and said, "Miss Whitmore, this court does not serve as an appeals desk for matters already ruled upon by higher jurisdictions. This is small claims, not a zoning hearing. You brought no valid claim." He banged the gavel. Case dismissed. Please do not return to this courtroom with unresolved civil disputes masked as infrastructure emergencies. Mason didn't smile. Not outwardly, but inside. It was satisfaction made real. And still, Karen wasn't done. She waited for him in the parking lot, like some kind of suburban final boss. He spotted her leaning against the hood of her sedan, arms folded, sunglasses off now, exposing eyes that had lost their shine but not their fire. "You think you've won," she said. "But the board's still with me. If I go, someone worse might take my place." Mason didn't argue. He just said the truth. "Good. Let them. At least they'll know where the line is." She stared at him for a long second. Then she turned. This time, she didn't look back. In the days that followed, something shifted. Not with Karen, but with everyone else. It started with the HOA board. Rumors began swirling: an emergency meeting, a possible vote. Some residents reached out directly. Quiet calls. Anonymous messages. A few asked for advice. Some offered support. One even admitted, "We didn't realize she was using your land. She never told us. She said it was already approved." Mason didn't play the hero. He didn't need to. The documents had spoken louder than any speech ever could. Then came the meeting. It wasn't public. He didn't attend. But the results trickled out in whispers, then text threads, then neighborhood forums. Karen was asked to resign. She resisted. Claimed betrayal. Cried sabotage. Called it a mistake. But the board had read the same letters Mason had submitted. The same court rulings. The same zoning violations. Eventually, she stepped down. Her reign was over. The clipboard retired. The new president of the HOA was different. Quieter. Smarter. He reached out through an actual land use attorney, not a temper tantrum in a blazer. He offered a formal apology. Not an excuse. Just an acknowledgement that what happened was wrong. That it wouldn't happen again. Mason met with him. Once. They didn't become friends. But they found common ground. Together, they located an unused strip of county-owned land that the HOA could legally develop into an access road. It required more paperwork, more engineering, and a longer route, but it was the right way. Mason helped, not for them, for himself, because he was tired of war. And peace was worth more than any gate ever built. A month later, the trucks returned, but not to his driveway. They rolled along a newly cleared path, far from his property, quiet as ghosts. The gravel in front of his home remained untouched. The gate remained shut. And the plaque he had mounted beneath it? Still there. No HOA access. But now, just beneath it, he carved one more line. Some fences are built from wood. Others from lessons. That night, as the sun slipped behind the ridge, Mason stood on his porch, coffee in hand, and watched a deer cross the quiet gravel. No diesel engines. No clipboards. No trespass. Just silence. Earned. Defended. His. The storm had passed, but the land remembered. Even after the court filings were sealed, the gravel smoothed, and the trucks rerouted, Mason Carter could still feel the outlines of the fight like phantom scars beneath the surface. It lingered in the rustle of mesquite, in the silent blink of the trail cam, in the freshly tamped earth where the first survey flags had dared to trespass. And yet, there was peace. Not the performative kind they sell in brochures, with scripted smiles and HOA newsletters about seasonal flower beds. This was real peace. The kind you forge yourself. The kind you bleed for. The kind that comes when you've stood your ground, held the line, and walked back inside without burning everything down. Mason spent that fall quietly. The new road was approved, construction resumed, and the HOA receded into the background like a hum that no longer needed to be heard. Karen? She didn't vanish. She just faded. Rumor had it she still lived in Whispering Pines, her name now spoken in past tense and side glances. The Queen of Clipboards had become a cautionary tale, a parable shared over backyard fences and whispered between new homeowners. Don't do what Karen did. She didn't send more letters, didn't make more appearances, no more drones, no more envelopes. It was like even she knew that she'd been seen, not just by Mason, not just by the court, but by everyone. And once seen, her power evaporated. The access lot Mason had fortified with steel posts and chain-link fencing took on a new shape. He didn't tear it down. He landscaped it. Native grasses, ironwood trees, a walking path carved through crushed stone, a small wooden bench with a plaque that simply read, "This is where the line was." Neighbors sometimes stopped by, not to trespass, just to look. Sometimes they brought coffee. Sometimes they brought questions. Sometimes they just sat quietly. One woman, a mother of two who had unknowingly signed on to the HOA with promises of exclusive mountain access, brought him a thank you pie. She admitted she'd once called him a roadblock. She now called him the guy who saved us from a lawsuit. Mason wasn't sure he liked either label. He wasn't trying to be a hero, just a man who'd had enough. By winter, the calls stopped. The traffic slowed. The only noise came from the owls and the coyotes, reclaiming the quiet that had been borrowed, disturbed, and finally restored. One crisp morning, a county official, different from the others, pulled up in a white utility truck. He stepped out, clipboard in hand, but this time not with threats. Just questions. He asked about Mason's gate, about the lot, about usage and access. Mason answered plainly, private family space. No commercial activity. No development. Just boundaries. The official nodded. We're reviewing the area for long-term zoning classification. Given what's happened, we'd like to record the lot as non-negotiable private space. Mason stared at him. Non-negotiable, he repeated. The man smiled. You drew the line. We're just making it legal. That night, as the first snowfall kissed the ridge, Mason stood at the gate with a thermos in hand. The deer were back. The stars shimmered. And for the first time since this entire mess began, he let himself breathe. Not in anticipation of the next email. Not in bracing for the next confrontation. But in relief. Peace wasn't passive. It wasn't silence. It wasn't pretending things were fine. Peace was clarity. Peace was boundaries. Peace was the moment you realized that everything they tried to take from you, the road, the quiet, the name on a piece of land, was still yours. Because you defended it. Because you refused to be erased. And maybe, Mason thought as he turned to walk back inside, the next time someone tried to bulldoze their way through a private life with a clipboard and a plan, they'd remember what happened here, on a rocky trail at the edge of Whispering Pines, where one man planted his boots, raised a gate, and proved that some fences don't keep people out. They keep integrity in.